Hi, this short video serves to provide an overview of assignment number 2, the concept-based lesson plan. This lesson plan is one of your 3 to 5 consecutive lessons that you are designing for your unit planner assignment due at the end of the course. This lesson plan should reflect best practices or evidence-based practices that we've been learning throughout the course and is a way for you to showcase all that you've learned about effective teaching and learning in the social studies this semester, as well as your understanding of concept-based curriculum and instruction. You are to teach this lesson no later than April 18th, the last day for your field hours this semester. So in this short video, I want to provide a review of some of the key ideas that we've been discussing throughout our modules and the requirements for assessment for this assignment. So throughout the class, we've been using the backward design model. You may not have realized that, but it was very intentional in the way that I structured the modules and sequenced them. We essentially are starting with the end in mind, and this is what most teachers do when they design curriculum. Where do you want students to be at the end of a unit of study, or grade level, or course of study, or however you'd like to conceptualize it? So following the backward design model, there are 3 stages. The first is to identify desired results. Those are those learning outcomes and the big ideas that you would like students to attain during the course of study. So for instance, in the very beginning of the course when we started learning about concept-based curriculum and instruction, I had you deconstruct or unpack your standards to identify the concepts that are in the standards. Because remember that the standards are not so much an indicator of what you should be teaching in terms of the topics and the facts, because they're very flexible in nature. They're primarily conceptual. If you look at K through 6 social studies standards in particular, primarily they emphasize concepts and not specific topics or events or people or places. So they're very flexible, and that's really a good thing for teachers because you can incorporate topics and examples that would be relevant to your students and would be interesting to them based on their age level, their needs, their interests, and so forth. So the first stage, again, identify desired results. What do you want students to know? That's the content. Understand. Those are the generalizations or conceptual relationships. And then be able to do, and those are your process skills or your objectives. So that is where we began when we started thinking about curriculum design. Then prior to planning lessons, you want to think about what would be acceptable evidence of the knowledge, skills, dispositions, and understandings that you unpacked in stage 1. Those are your formative and summative assessments. So please review the module on assessment and think about what types of checks for understanding, informal assessment for your formative assessment examples, and what types of summative assessment or cumulative or end of unit assessment might be effective for your students. Now, typically these are traditionally tests or quizzes, essays, for example, but I want you to think outside the box here and consider what might be a creative showcase of understanding in a way that students transfer their learning by ideally taking action to share their learning with a broader audience instead of just the teacher. And then lastly, here we are, stage 3, we are planning learning experiences in instruction. And those are your day-by-day or hour-by-hour learning experiences that you are planning for your students. So your unit planner assignment is, again, where you are deriving your concept-based lesson plan from. Keep in mind, I'm going to highlight some of the key ideas that we've been learning about throughout the modules when you're designing your lesson. A vision of powerful teaching and learning from the National Council for the Social Studies. They indicated that these 5 descriptors characterize powerful teaching and learning in the social studies. They are meaningful, so this should, again, highlight the relevance of the learning that you are planning for your students, highlighting examples that might interest them, topics and events that they may be aware of, or things that they see in their community, things that they care about. Make it meaningful to them. Integrative. So throughout the course, we've been talking about ways that we can integrate the social studies and other content areas like ELA or science. Value-based, challenging, and active. So again, the idea is that the lessons and the teaching experience, the learning experiences that you're designing should actively engage your students. It should challenge them to grow beyond where they are when you started. And it should have some higher purpose in terms of promoting good citizenship and ethics and responsibility as citizens. So let's talk. So what are the essential components of a high quality lesson plan? Think about what you've learned in the examples that I've provided throughout our modules. There are, of course, countless templates for lesson plans that you've probably been exposed to in both your field work and your coursework. So we're using the Elementary Education EdTPA lesson plan, and I've aligned it with concept-based curriculum and instruction that I've been teaching you throughout the course. So it's sort of a blending of those two. But there are components that are shared with other common templates that you may have seen before. So you're probably familiar with the Madeline Hunter model. It's a direct instruction model, follows a step-by-step process that includes teacher input, that's the direct instruction part, modeling, checking for understanding, and then guided practice where you're scaffolding student learning, and then independent practice, which is usually your assessment, what can they do independently, followed by a closure of the lesson. So these components are certainly included in most lessons, but it doesn't mean that you need to begin with teacher input. You could include teacher input after students explore, which is evident in these inquiry-based models. So the 5E learning cycle begins with students engaging in the material and exploring before the teacher scaffolds and facilitates learning. Similarly, with project-based learning, as we've learned about, student learning is driven by a question or a challenge, and then students work through a series of learning experiences that are structured and facilitated by the teacher to get to that end result, which is a publicly presented product. That would be your summative assessment in your unit plan. Kath Murdoch is an inquiry cycle that I really like, that I've seen used primarily in IB schools that I have visited, or global schools that you may have done field work in. Tuning in, finding out, sorting out, going further, making conclusions, and then again, the last piece is taking action. And then lastly, we have seen this with the C3 framework that you were introduced to in an earlier module, that is learning is driven by guiding questions and source sets. So you have practiced with creating source sets of high quality primary, secondary sources, and the students come to the understandings that the teacher desires through these guiding questions. So it's more student-driven learning using inquiry. So no matter the type of framework that you use, they all do share common characteristics. Concept-based curriculum and instruction I view as a blending of the two types, direct and maybe indirect or integrated teaching and learning. The teacher certainly has preconceived ideas about what those big ideas or those generalizations should be at the top of the structure of knowledge framework. And again, these derive from the concepts that you identified in your standards and the relationship between those concepts to get to the big idea. And the topics and facts, again, can be chosen by the teacher since the standards are intentionally very broad and open-ended and concept-based. So that, again, there is a very intentional purpose in the learning, but the teacher can certainly use inquiry to get students there. So in terms of stage 3, there are certain ideas that you want to keep in mind no matter the framework or lesson template that you choose. The learning should foster students' content knowledge, conceptual understandings. Those are also the generalizations and your skills. We are calling these learning targets to align with the EdTPA language to help prepare you for internship. Formative assessment then should inform the teacher whether the instruction was effective. And the teacher will include some areas of teacher input or delivery of content using clear, precise statements and questioning. As appropriate, you're modeling and scaffolding student learning, and throughout, there should be a high level of student engagement. As you're planning your lessons, I want you to keep these questions in mind. How will you engage your students? And the emphasis there is on all learners. Using what kind of materials and methods? And have you checked for alignment between stages 1 and 2? In other words, does your curriculum, instruction, and assessment all align? And how does the teacher know whether the student met the learning objectives? Throughout the course, we've been thinking about human psychology and what makes students or people want to learn and what helps them remember what they were taught. You were introduced to the Success Sticky model. This is based on the business world, but it applies to learning because if you think about an effective ad campaign, there's a reason people remember some ads and don't remember others. You can apply those same principles to teaching and learning. Simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories. And concept development I have woven throughout the last few modules. Practices that you may consider on the left-hand side here is engaging students in analysis and reasoning. Those higher level conceptual why or how questions are really important. Students should be problem solving. They can make predictions, experimentation even in social studies by generating hypotheses. You ask them a broad abstract question, give them materials to explore, see whether their hypotheses were correct. Classifying and comparing, you learned in the module about introducing concepts using concept attainment as one example, and then evaluating sources. Creating and then integrating with other concepts. If you explore the concepts of other fields, you'll see that social studies shares many similar concepts with them. Integrating with prior knowledge is highly important, and that's why we had you analyze students' prior knowledge when you interview your teacher, completing the context for learning handout. And connections to the real world, that's that relevance piece that I've mentioned before. How will you choose topics of interest to your students and also those that are relevant to them? And the context that you choose to show examples of your concepts should be from as close to their experiences as possible, then to as abstract as possible to help get them to that transfer piece. This is a graphic that I like from James Nottingham, who writes about concept-based learning. It's really normal for you as a learner and for your students as learners to struggle as they learn concepts and develop these big ideas. But this is what critical thinking is all about, and I want your lesson plan to reflect students struggling a little bit and pushing their thinking a little bit. Otherwise, why is it worth doing? I want you to keep that in mind. In an age where we can Google information and find it in less than a second, that's not as helpful to students. Although the facts are important, what kind of patterns and relationships between those facts help get them to the broader understandings that help them as future citizens and employees and critical thinkers. So that's what I want you to keep in mind, that cognitive conflict is a good thing. And I want to see evidence of critical thinking, creative thinking in your lesson plan. Please try to avoid just rote memory via worksheets as one example. Get beyond that to the bigger ideas that you want students to attain. So with that in mind, let's look at concept-based inquiry lesson planning. We have studied Julie Stern's work throughout the course, and I like this strategy. It's simple in terms of easy to understand for a teacher, but then it's up to you on how you actually implement it using which examples. But just start with one of your conceptual questions that come from your unit plan or framework. And then you ask them, what do you think about this? Through examples, through context that you will provide, students will generate their hypotheses and then test them through readings, videos, tangible materials, and other resources that you provide for them. And that should help them get to the big idea or the generalization that you want them to attain. We've also looked at different ways of engaging students with peer conversations and inquiry using visible thinking routines. I highly recommend you look at these and think about where any of these might be appropriate to place during your instruction. You could, for example, start your lesson with a See, Think, Wonder or Think, Puzzle, Explore by posing a photograph or bringing in tangible objects and having them look at them. This helps you determine what their prior knowledge and experiences are with the content you're teaching, and it also sets the stage for inquiry. And then some of the others would be good for your formative assessment, like the Step Inside routine. If you're having students analyze the perceptions or perspectives of another living being, it could be a person or an animal, it could even be an inanimate object, but having them think about what does that person or thing know, care about, and want to tell others. That would be a great way to close a lesson and have them demonstrate their learning in a creative way. And then throughout, I want you to have opportunity for students to talk to each other, even if it's as simple as a think, pair, share. So encourage the sharing ideas and listening to student ideas and incorporating those ideas in your instruction. And finally, I want you to really be mindful of the learning materials that you choose. They should be rich and high quality. We have looked at Notable Trade Book publications, I think in our very first module, in fact. So there are a lot of high quality children's books available on your content that you may include. There are also primary source sets through the Library of Congress and other sites I've provided. Artifacts if you're teaching about human culture as one example. And then all the digital tools that we've explored. If appropriate, it would be great for teacher delivery of content or for student practice and assessment. So I want you to take a look at the rubric. There are 5 areas I'll be assessing. The learning targets, those are your learning objectives. What should students know and understand, be able to do? The generalizations are those conceptual understandings. You should use a mixed set of guiding questions. These are factual, conceptual, and then if appropriate, debatable. These come straight from your unit planner, so you're not rewriting these. Please take a look at the feedback I've given you on those modules where you constructed some sample questions and make any kind of modifications or additions to those. And then you're just pulling those straight from your framework and inserting them in the lessons where they fit. So think about what kind of abstract conceptual question would be appropriate for your lesson plan, as well as the fact-based questions that you might ask throughout instruction. The teacher behaviors and student behaviors are outlined in your rubric, but think about how to facilitate student learning via modeling, examples, and scaffolding. And then the student behaviors are, I'm looking for all students being engaged in developmentally appropriate creative activities. And as appropriate, making accommodations or differentiating learning such as reading levels as appropriate for your lesson. In terms of your assessment, you should include a creative, formative assessment, a check for understanding, and collect 3 different work samples of that assessment to analyze in your reflection. So as a reminder, please do ensure that your lesson is approved by your teacher prior to teaching. Collect those 3 work samples. You can take photographs from your phone, for example, if you cannot take any back with you to scan to include in your lesson plan, but you can take photos and write down student quotes or whatever assessment you're using. Collect those however is appropriate based on your lesson. And then I've provided prompts for you. It should be about a 1-page reflection. What went well? What would you do differently in general terms? But the prompts that I've provided are from EdTPA to have some practice with that before you go into internship next semester. So that in a nutshell is your lesson plan assignment. Again, it is one of the 3 to 5 lessons that are highlighted in your unit planner. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to meet via Skype or phone or in my office before the deadline. If you need me to give any feedback, just let me know. Give me a couple days to turn around feedback, and I'm happy to help you. Okay, well, I look forward to seeing what you all design, and I hope you have a great experience teaching your lesson in the field.